Right. Well, welcome everybody to another CRC OER Award Program workshop. This particular workshop, we are going to be talking about regular and effective contact and how to leverage discussions and feedback to increase engagement in your online courses. Now, this can apply to both synchronous and asynchronous courses for online courses, and it can also apply to face-to-face courses as well. For the most part, the stuff that I'm going to be referencing is primarily geared towards distance education, online or hybrid courses. But hopefully those of you that are teaching face-to-face and watching this later will find it helpful. Okay, so first off, let's talk about our objectives for today's workshop. Today, we're going to be learning what regular and effective contact is. This is also, this term is synonymous with regular and substantive interaction. And so we'll just basically define that based on what it says in Title V. And then we'll talk about ways to create engaging regular and effective contact. So you may have heard of humanizing your online class. There was a whole movement, a whole set of activities and workshops in a class through the online network of educators about humanizing. And so I'm going to be pulling a little bit of that into our workshop today. Next semester, CRC will be offering a Humanize Your Online course for interested faculty. It's an online course. I think it's going to be 4 weeks. Reach out to Greg Beyer if you're interested in that. We'll also be talking about how to design in discussion board prompts that will increase engagement. And again, this could apply to a face-to-face class if you're struggling with engagement. I've got some suggestions, some ideas that you may want to explore. I'm also going to talk about surveys and how you can use surveys to both seek feedback from your students about how you're doing and also to provide feedback to students about how they're doing. And finally, talking about feedback on assessments. For those of you that are in the workshop right now or watching this later, you can access this presentation at any time using this URL. And Andy, if you wouldn't mind, if you could place the link in the chat for this presentation, that would be super duper helpful. Okay.
Yes, I will do it.
Thank you so much. All right, so let's start off with what regular and effective contact is. So as I mentioned before, regular and effective contact is synonymous with another phrase called regular and substantive interaction. So if you've done any research on teaching online effectively, you've probably come across one of these terms, if not both of them. Regular and effective contact is actually required by Title V. And in Title V, it states that any portion of a course that is conducted through distance education, which means that the instructor and the student are physically separated in either time or space, and that must include regular and effective contact between instructor and students, among students, and this can take place either synchronously or asynchronously. Now, the Title V guidelines are very clear in stating that this is an academic and professional matter and is therefore best determined by faculty. And so each college or district is left to their own devices to determine what regular and effective contact actually is. So I did some research because CRC doesn't really have much in the way of regular and effective contact guidelines right now. I did some research and I found that according to the ASCCC, regular and effective contact should be consistent and predictable. And again, once again, it doesn't say like how many times a week what consistent means. It should be instructor initiated, meaning that you will be reaching out to your students. When students reach out to you, that doesn't really qualify as regular and effective contact. And that it should be more than just a boilerplate assessment of work, like automatically graded assignments. So online courses should also provide a means of regular and effective contact among students, which means that students can initiate contact with other students and that they're provided opportunities to do so on a frequent basis. Now, Title V up until just recently, actually had regular and effective contact among students as part of the definition of regular and effective contact. That's actually changed, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't encourage our students to interact with one another, because that really provides a sense of community in a class, which, as you will learn, really helps with engagement and retention. So let's dive a little bit deeper into what regular actually means. Last year, I guess a year and a half ago now, the Sacramento City College Academic Senate approved a set of guidelines for regular and effective contact for online instructors. The link is there in the presentation, which if you have access to the presentation right now, you can click on it and see it. But I wanted to kind of take just a couple of things out there. This set of guidelines is really comprehensive, and it's got a lot of great stuff in it. I suggest that you reference that when you can. What I'd like to share is that their recommendation, this is the Sac City's AS recommendation, is that to meet the minimum number of regular and effective contacts per week, there must be at least one regular and effective contact for each hour of seat time. So for example, you have a 3-unit class, you would therefore have 3 hours of what we would call seat time, as if it were an in-person on-campus course. So therefore, there should be at least 3 regular and effective contacts between the instructor and the students each week for 100% online 3-unit 16-week course. Now this changes a little bit if we're talking about an 8-week course. You can kind of almost double that for an 8-week course, but this should give you an idea of what regular and consistent really consists of. Now, what makes it effective? That's another question, right? We've got to contact our students, let's say 3 or 4 times per week, but what does that actually mean? Like, what are we doing to make this effective contact? Okay, so one way to ensure that you are establishing an effective communication with your students is to set expectations right off the bat. And so that not only helps students understand what they can expect of you, but also what you can expect of yourself, right? As a kind of a reminder, like my goal is to communicate with you in these ways every week. And this is, how frequently you can expect me to do that. In the CRC online course template, which I will share later, I have a sample communication policy in there, and you can adapt that to your own course depending on the number of units or the length of time that the course is being offered, like 8-week or 16-week. But it's a really good idea to set those expectations early on so that students know whether, maybe you're not dropping the ball. You're actually doing exactly what you said you were going to be doing, and they just had different expectations than what you actually stated. Okay. So some other suggestions for effective contacts would be Canvas announcements. Now, this is kind of a broadcast message that you would send to your students 1 or 2 times a week. I've found that a lot of instructors that do this really effectively usually send a beginning of the week email that kind of gives them a rundown of what to expect during the week, maybe gives them some suggestions or feedback from the previous week's work. And then also a second announcement later on in the week, which is again a reminder, hey, don't forget, we're doing this and this is due and when, but also maybe some additional information or resources that can act to continue that engagement. So if the student has not yet started, this is like the little carrot that you would give them to ensure that they can, that they engage with the content during the course of the week. Regular and effective contact, and the effective part definitely consists of individual messages to students. Now you can do this through email, you can do it through the Canvas inbox or conversations. You can use gradebook notifications. There's a really great feature in the gradebook where you can do the message students who. So if you find that a student has not submitted an assignment, you can send them an individual message. You can also use the student course context card, and I can show you how to do that if you're unfamiliar with that. It's like a little thing when you click on a student's name, it like pops up on the right-hand side of your Canvas window. And then there's a little mailbox icon that you can use to send a message directly to your students. You don't have to go into conversations to do that. And this is a really important part of regular and effective contact, is making sure you're actually individually reaching out to your students. Another way to individually contact the students is to provide them with feedback on assessments. And this is individualized feedback. Automated feedback is great. It's really, really helpful, but that individualized feedback shows that you care. And it shows that you're monitoring your students' progress, and it gives them an opportunity to ask for clarification. It opens up that communication. Another way to do regular and effective contact is synchronously, right? Even if you have an asynchronous course, you can offer Zoom office hours. And there's always the, well, my students never come. It's like, okay, that's fair. Like maybe students don't have time. Maybe when we're offering our office hours, it's convenient for us, but it may not work for our students who are typically accessing Canvas after like 11 p.m. Not saying that you have to have office hours 11 p.m., but that could be part of it. You can ask your students, send them a survey. What's the best time? Give them opportunities for extra credit if they come by, or be like, okay, if you come by, I can help you with your homework assignment, and that's great, right? Another element that I know that there are really mixed feelings about this one. I put it on there because this is based on my personal experience. We often use discussions in our classes, but we don't actually engage in those discussions, right? So if we post a discussion online for our online students and we expect them to participate in it, but we're only giving them a grade, we're not actually engaging and demonstrating what good engagement and participation looks like, then we can't really have very high expectations for them. So my philosophy has always been engage in the discussions. And it is the most amount of work that I have in my online class. It is hours and hours of work every week. But my students never say they hate the discussions. They're really engaged. I learn from the discussions. I learn from my students. And it makes teaching an online class so much more fun because it's not just the same like rote activity every week, right? So I really encourage you to consider participating in discussions if you're not already. Okay, did that. All right, and last one, I think this is the last one, is group work. So another way to have effective engagement and communication with your students and for students with each other is through group work and peer reviews. I know group work, don't stress. There are ways to make group work doable. I know that there are instructors out there at CRC that really effectively manage the group work and can really get students to engage in that. And I think that we had a showcase recently about that. And if we don't have a group work, I know that there's going to be a flex workshop at Convocation about group work, but maybe we can recruit some folks who are really using group work effectively in their classes to provide some spotlights to help us all come along with the group work. Okay. So we've talked about what's regular, we've talked about what's effective. Did we cover it all? Well, sort of. So this is a statement that is a summarization of an article. And this is from Michelle Pacansky-Brock's Humanizing program. And Michelle Pacansky-Brock is a pioneer in online education, and she has so many fabulous resources about humanizing our courses. And what this means is that basically students are more likely to lean in and apply themselves at a higher and more rigorous level when they know that the instructor believes in them. So we want to be a human. We want to be real and authentic and encouraging, and not kind of robotic, if you will. And it's easy to fall into the distance part of distance learning, but it makes a huge difference in student success if we engage as real people and show them that their learning and their success is important to them. Okay, so what does that mean? What does this actually mean? So this particular image that you see right here is taken from an infographic, and I'm actually going to click on this infographic because I want to share it with you. And I'll pop this infographic in the chat so that you can access it yourself. And this infographic is taken from kind of all of the work that Michelle Pacansky-Brock has done on humanizing. And she identifies the basic principles of humanizing, kind of how you would approach this from an instructional standpoint, and then concrete things that you can do to humanize your course. Now, I'm not going to go into this entire thing and all of this stuff today. I will talk about a few of them, for example, warm, wise feedback. And then just some elements of humanizing. But I wanted to show this to you because I think this is a really great way to start off your humanizing adventure. And there is a full version of this infographic that has a lot more information in it. So just want to point that out to you guys. Okay. So basically, to have students really engage with your course, right? It was the whole point of this workshop is to increase engagement. We want to humanize. We want to show our students that we care and that we can be trusted and that we trust them. So the principles of humanizing are cultivating trust. And you'll see in this image here that trust is all throughout, right? And it is kind of the backbone of humanizing online learning. The second component is being present, being authentic, be yourself, but most importantly, be there. Be there and be open to your students. Learn about your students. Find out who they are, what their needs are, find out how to support them. There's a survey that Greg has posted on Canvas Commons that we can all adopt. That just basically is a get to know you survey so that we can use that information that we get from our students about who they are, and then use that information to support them, incorporate their needs and who they are into the feedback that we give them to show them that we identify them as an individual that matters. And lastly, be empathetic and flexible. And I know when I'm gonna fully admit here that when I first started teaching at community college, oh my gosh, I was in my early 20s, right? I'd just gotten out of grad school. And so I was the same age as my students. And I was used to these really rigid professors that I had experienced in grad school and undergrad at university. And so I was emulating that in my classes, and I lost students because I wasn't empathetic enough, because I was rigid and inflexible in my deadlines and my makeup policies and the type of work that I would allow students to submit. It had to fit exactly into what I needed. And really, for a GE biology class, it turns out that's not really necessary for students to succeed. And so I think I've learned in my own experience that being more flexible and empathetic really not only makes my life a heck of a lot easier, but it also makes the learning experience more pleasurable for our students. Okay. So now, how are we going to combine these humanizing principles into regular and effective contact? And so what I promised in the outline for this workshop was that we were going to talk about creating meaningful discussions, and then also providing meaningful feedback using surveys or assessment feedback in order to provide frequent, meaningful, and individualized opportunities for student and instructor-student communication. So before I get started on this, are there any questions about what we've seen so far, the humanizing or the regular and effective contact?
It's not a question, Jenna, but I just want to kind of piggyback on something that even what you were just talking about, how sometimes we forget what it's like to be a young student. And when I say young, I don't even necessarily mean age. I mean new to higher education. And I've had many students who are coming back after a very long absence, and they're already feeling like I'm not smart enough to be here. So I think that that empathy piece is so very important, and especially when you're in an online class and you might not have a chance to interact with them face to face. I think just showing your students that you're human also, and that you understand that life is hard sometimes, can be so impactful for them to be successful.
Thank you, Andy. I really appreciate that. It's a really important thing is, and I learned this from you, remember the human. I learned that from your course, and that really struck a chord with me. And it's changed the way that I have approached teaching online. Yeah, everyone comes with their own insecurities and their fears, right? They don't come into a class completely confident, or in the case of fast track, we don't come into having someone pick apart our class with like this ultimate level of confidence, right? And so we need to remember that we have our own insecurities and our own imposter syndrome. I know I certainly do. And so do our students. And we want to help them, one, acknowledge that, and then grow, grow through that and past it. And if we are distant from our students physically and emotionally, and there isn't that connection there, then really the fears and insecurities can start to feed off of each other, and then we lose them. So I think that connection is truly probably one of the most important parts of engaging and student success in online courses. So thanks. Any other questions or comments? Experiences? Okay, I'm going to continue on. And so we're going to talk about some sort of applications for how we can have regular and effective contact and also humanize our courses. So discussions. Discussions are kind of the fallback or the sort of traditional way that we can engage students in our online classes. It's a very easy way to ensure regular and effective student-to-student communication. And if you participate as the instructor, then it also satisfies the instructor-initiated communication with students. So there's a double whammy there with the discussions. But discussions that successful discussions take a little bit of work and a little bit of planning and a willingness to accept messiness. I know that sounds weird, but hopefully I can explain it. So let's imagine that we've got a discussion and we have posted 3 questions. Maybe they're like study guide kind of questions, and they have very clear answers. So students have to post their answers before they can see their peers' posts. So what's going to happen there, right? Students are going to answer the 3 questions. They're going to check and see that somebody else answered the same questions, and they're going to say, hey, that's what I got. Way to go. And that's pretty much it for the discussion, right? Not a whole lot happens there because students are just looking at the answer in the book, and there's not a whole lot of opportunity for them to engage more deeply with the content. So yes, we definitely want to make sure that our discussion topics, our discussion prompts, if you will, connect to the module and course objectives. Like obviously we want to do that. They don't need to be like completely out there. We want to still make sure that we're helping students solidify their understanding of the material, but we want to kind of give them a little bit more opportunity to explore. And so in my experience and from what I've learned as an online course design coordinator for Fast Track and also through my professional development, is that open-ended questions are the ones that get the most engagement. And so this is an opportunity for students to interpret. And yeah, I teach biology, so you kind of like, there's not a lot of interpretation, right? It's very factual, but maybe not so much, right? I could post a question about genetically modified organisms or cloning, for example, or we could talk about, COVID and vaccinations. So there a lot of options, even in a class that seems very fact-oriented, for students to engage in a more open and creative discussion. And they're never the same. They're always different. Every semester, the discussions are different, or student posts are different for the same basic open-ended questions. Another way to get students to engage more is to apply real world questions, or to give students an opportunity to apply what they learn to the real world. And I'll give you some examples of that. But students seem to, and this is part of like the higher order Bloom's taxonomy, right? Is application, synthesis, creativeness. And those higher order thinking usually involve taking what they've learned in class and applying it to real world scenarios. They can also apply it to their own experiences. I've found that when students feel connected to the discussion prompt, they are much more likely to connect with each other and to contribute really thoughtful posts to the discussion. For example, in my anatomy and physiology class, a lot of my discussions center around disorders of the human body. So for example, we're talking about the digestive system, and I'll say, okay, class, I'd like you to pick a disorder of the digestive system and tell us blah, 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 blah about it. And if you have personal experience with this, please share your personal experiences with this disease. And so we have students with Crohn's disease and students with irritable bowel syndrome or hemorrhoids, and they're just like full on confessional sharing this stuff. And it's awesome because you have, one student who's gluten, who has Crohn's disease, and another student who maybe has celiac disease, and they can talk about how their symptoms are similar and why. I mean, it's great. It's really cool. And they're applying the context. They're using terminology from the course. And so, we're meeting objectives. So the last thing that I'm going to say about creating meaningful discussions before giving you some examples is that even though you're providing open-ended questions that allow for students to add their own personal experiences, you still want to be really clear about your expectations. And I'll show you an example of what being clear about expectations looks like. But like clearly identify deadlines, what you want in their posts, and how they're going to participate, how many times essentially they will participate in that class. Okay, so now I'd like to give you a couple of examples of discussion prompts. So these are all really, really generic, but hopefully what this does is it demonstrates some of the things that I was just talking about. So for example, after you read the chapter, think of a time when blank happened. Describe your experience. What information did you use to make that judgment? What have you learned now that might change your thinking? And so everybody's going to have a different example, right? And so students can go and find peers that have a similar experience, but interpreted it differently, or maybe they had a different experience and they have another suggestion. So this is really going to get students talking because it's so open-ended. However, they are still using what they learned in the class and demonstrating that they're meeting the objectives in that way. Here's another example. Now that we've learned about X, let's explore the topic further. Select one question from the list below. So I'm giving them options, right? Maybe 3 or 4 options, and do some research on one of those things. Share what you learned with the class and be sure to indicate, and here's where we clarify our expectations. Make sure you tell me what the original question was, provide a citation or 2, use key terms from the class, ask another question about it if it's not clear, connect it to your personal experience. You've got lots of options here, but these are all examples of how we can ask students to take a step further and apply what they're learning in class, and then providing clear expectations for their post, even though everybody's going to have a slightly different take on it. Here's another one. I've seen this used in like business classes or managerial accounting classes, that kind of stuff. So you've got a scenario, let's say somebody's like skimming something off the books. What did you, based on what you learned in the module, explain how you would handle this differently than said manager, and provide justification. So once again, we've got lots of options, right? Everybody could handle it just a little bit differently. And then they need to provide justification from the chapter materials, what they're learning in the module. Okay, last one. So discussions are also an opportunity for students to get feedback on their creative works. And this is often really scary for students, because just as it is for us, right? And we're sharing something that we have created and we're putting it out there for everyone to critique. But this is also a really great way for students to engage with each other, to provide feedback and encouragement, and also to learn and see what everybody else is doing in the class. If you're in an online class and you never see anybody's work, like not even like sitting next to them being like, what'd you get for this? Then it can be a really isolating experience. And so a prompt like this one, where students are sharing an example of their own creative work, can really help students connect with one another and be like, oh, you like to do that too. I do that in my work, or, you know, or wow, I never thought about doing it that way. Thank you so much for giving me that idea. So again, this is more deep, meaningful engagement than just answering some kind of questions with fixed answers. Okay, so I promised that I would show you the expectations component of a course. So we're here in just a demo shell, and I've got a sample discussion here. And hopefully this text is big enough for you. I'm not sure if I increase the text, if it's going to show up on your screen or not. But basically what we see here is that we've got the deadline really clear right at the top. We've got an introductory section, specific instructions for the initial post and the peer responses, and then expectations, right? What we expect of them and when they should be providing these 2 posts. And then you can add a rubric here. If you don't have a rubric already, this will say add rubric instead of show rubric. So if I click on this, my rubric is pretty extensive, because in my classes, the discussion is a large part of their grade, because that's where I want them to be most engaging. And frankly, it's where they're going to demonstrate that they really can apply this information. And so I want to give them credit for the work that they put in, because some students put in hours researching stuff for their posts. And then the last section in here is for help. So if you like the way that this looks, or you want to try to create a structure like this for your class, this is a sample from my course template on Commons. So you can access this by selecting Commons, and then do a search for CRC template. And we're going to go for the one that is the most recent one, right? CRC online course template. And you can download the entire template into your course using this blue import download option. And there's a lot of stuff in here, right? So you probably want to put this in a dev shell, a development shell, or a sandbox. But there's also sample assignments and sample discussions with all of those Canvas help items. Like all of this, it's already in there and it's already formatted. So that's kind of handy for that. Okay, if you have a question about how to request a dev shell, I can address that at the end of our workshop. Okay, so discussions are a great way to engage students in regular and effective contact. It's a great way to show that you are engaged with the students, and it's another way to provide support. There are other options besides the whole class discussion for engagement. Small group discussions can sometimes be even better than a whole class discussion, because then students are only kind of putting themselves out there with a smaller group. It seems more intimate and therefore can encourage more sharing than maybe in a large, overwhelming discussion where there are 100 posts. So that can really help. And small group discussions can be set up in Canvas very easily when you're in your edit area. In the settings part of the assignment, you can identify this as a group discussion, and then you can create a group, for example, a group set. So this would be like, you know, small groups, weeks 2 and 3, and then you can shuffle the students up if you want to, and it'll automatically split the students, and it'll happen, they get automatically shifted in, or you can create groups if you want to. So anyway, that's an option with discussions. There are also some other interaction tools that you can use. Oops, Padlet. Padlet is a great option, and Andy can certainly speak to this because she uses it for some of her group discussions, but it's more of a visual idea board, a digital idea board that students can use, and they can respond to one another in the Padlet. So it's a great way to kind of mix things up a little bit. And Padlet is for the most part accessible if you were curious about that. We can also use peer review and assignments, and I can, if I have time, I can show you how to set peer review up. But basically, it can automatically assign a peer review to a student after the initial due date, and then students can provide feedback to each other on their work. There's also something called Hypothesis, which allows for a sort of social annotation of readings. I've seen that used in some English courses, and that's pretty cool. Students can create videos and interact with one another. One way to do this is using something called Flipgrid, and Flipgrid integrates into Canvas. You can add it to your Canvas course, and it basically creates a video discussion for students to interact with one another with short video responses. I talked about group work already as being an option for student interactions. And then there's something called Pronto. For those of you who've been around for a while, you may have remembered the initial Pronto pilot, and it kind of didn't really go as planned. Pronto has received that feedback, and they have updated their interface significantly. And next semester, CRC will be running a second pilot of Pronto, except for it will be an opt-in feature, meaning that instructors get to choose whether it is turned on in their course or not. And so I'm hopeful that instructors will attend Greg's workshop during our Flex Week about Pronto to learn more about how they can use that to increase engagement in their courses. Okay, so the next way that we can engage our students and increase engagement in classes is by using feedback. And there's a lot of options for feedback, but one option that I want to talk about are surveys. So feedback surveys can come in a variety of forms. They can be surveys that students are submitting to give you feedback on your course so that you can engage in continuous improvement of your online course. And students really love that, especially when it's anonymous feedback. They're very honest and it can be really helpful. You can also have feedback surveys where students are kind of giving you their current sort of sense of their progress in the course, like a progress check, and then you can provide them individualized feedback. Now, if you're wondering how to set those up, once again, I have feedbacks surveys already in the CRC online course template. So if you put that into a dev shell, you can copy these into your course. I've already added a couple of the surveys. Oops, let me go to modules here. I've already added a couple of the surveys to this particular shell. And so where are we? Here we are. So there's a couple of feedbacks here. There's a survey. It's an anonymous survey. Students can send me very early in the semester to tell me how things are going for them and things that they need from me. So this is feedback about my instruction. And then there's also self-reflection surveys. It's a good idea to do these frequently and early, especially the self-reflection ones. We want to try to catch our students before it's too far in the semester and there's not a whole lot that can be done about their grade. Earlier on in the semester kind of opens, as I said, opens that line of communication and makes it much more likely that students are going to seek help, especially if they can do it this way, which is a little bit less intimidating than coming to office hours. Okay, so once again, those you can set up. They're basically set up like quizzes. So when we go into a quiz setup, you see that there's this, let me wait for this to load. There is this quiz type option. So you can set it up as a graded quiz, a graded survey, or an ungraded survey. So the way that surveys work is that as soon as a student submits a graded survey, they automatically get points attached to that full credit, no matter what they answered or whether it was correct or not. Ungraded surveys don't have any point value, and they're really good for anonymous feedback stuff. One thing to note about graded and ungraded surveys is there's no way to add automated feedback to the questions like you can with quizzes. So keep that in mind if you're going to be using surveys for any kind of content related stuff that's problematic. Okay, so so feedback surveys, both for students and for faculty. Excuse me, I'm going to step away for just a moment and shut the door. All right, running multiple meetings in different rooms. Work from home. Okay, so then there's another way to provide feedback in your classes, and this is through assessments. And you know, like when we're teaching a face-to-face on-campus class, it's really easy to give general feedback to all of our students, right? Hey, everybody, here are some of the questions that most of you had when you completed this assignment. I'm going to go through it together with you. You can do that in an online class as well. An announcement is a great way to do that. But for individualized feedback specifically for that student alone, there are a lot of different ways that we can do this. If you're using quizzes as like a practice quiz kind of a thing, or as a low stakes formative assessment, you can add automated feedback to your quiz questions so that students can get immediate feedback on what they got wrong and why. It's a bit of a bear, excuse me, to set up the automated feedback in quizzes, but it can be done. So briefly, I'm going to show you how to do that in another quiz that I've got. Okay, so this quiz has a lot of questions that I've already added to it. Okay, so there's some fill in the blank questions, matching questions, and these are all pulled from question banks. I should probably do a quiz workshop at some point. But anyway, I want to show you this question that I just added. And so if I edit this, okay, and I've got my question here, but you'll notice that I have these additional things. So this is when if I look at this question before I added these comments, it would just have true or false, and then a little box down below it. Maybe I can show you here. This one probably has the way to do. Yeah, so let me change this to a multiple answers one. And so notice, see, there's this little thing here. This is our feedback box. So if I click on this, then I can add feedback that will be given to the student if they choose that as the answer. And if it's correct, great, you can tell them, woo, you got it right. And if it's incorrect, you can say, oh, you know what, remember this? You don't have to give them the answer, but give them a little nugget that'll get them going in the right direction. So feedback on quiz questions is great. You can also provide manual feedback on a question. Let's see if I have submitted a quiz for this yet. I'm not sure if I've taken the quiz. I haven't taken the quiz yet. Anyway, there is a way to add feedback, but given our time, I'm not going to do it. When you're in SpeedGrader, basically what you'll see is all of the quiz questions that the student has answered, and then there's a little box for additional comments, and you just type into that. So that's a way to provide individualized feedback on a quiz. I have to tell you though, most students don't know how to access that stuff. So you're going to want to make sure that you include information in the instructions of the quiz to tell them how to access the feedback. That's key. Okay, some other things that you can do, and I'm going to demonstrate this in a separate assignment. Let me go back to my modules. I want to show you how to add a feedback to an assignment rather than a quiz. And man, I love this. Where is my module? Here we go. Okay, here's my homework assignment. Now, my student has already submitted this assignment, so I'm going to go into SpeedGrader. And in SpeedGrader, there are a variety of options for adding feedback. You can use this view here to annotate on the assignment and add a comment. Oops. These are switched, right? Okay, and then click, and the student can reply and ask for clarification on it. So this is really handy if you know that your students are not using a screen reader and they don't have a visual disability. So this is not accessible for students who are blind or low vision. So just keep that in mind. If you plan on using this annotation feature, make sure that you tell students about that at the beginning of the semester and give them an opportunity to request an alternative form of feedback. Over here in the other panel, the grading panel, if you will, of the course, I have a rubric. And this rubric I added to my assignment before I published the assignment. So now I can add a student. Okay, so they did a paragraph. Good job. I'm going to add comments. And I do that by just clicking on the little chat kind of icon here. Great work. Okay. And then this one, oh man, you've got some stuff missing. Check out numbers 2 and 3. They're switched. Okay. And then click save. And so now when a student reviews this in their grades area, they're going to see my messages, my individualized feedback on here. You can also use canned feedback here if you know that students are going to keep missing the same thing, but it's still individual for the student. Okay, so some other features about adding assignment comments. So I don't know about you, but sometimes my hands get really sore from typing all day long. There is a dictation feature in the Canvas comments area of SpeedGrader that is pretty powerful. I hope you guys can see this if I demonstrate it. It does speech to text. Can you give me a thumbs up? Can you see the speech to text showing up on your screen? There's a little window there. If you see it,
Jena.
You can?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So if I speak into this period, I can actually dictate just like you would if you're dictating a text message, exclamation point. Okay. Oh man, it didn't, when I tested this earlier, it actually like converted that into an exclamation point. I didn't continue on fast enough, I guess, but then it puts it into your comments area. So that is a very handy tool, especially if you're giving a lot of feedback in this area, you can save your wrists. There are a couple of other options. You can, if you download a student's assignment and annotate it on there, you can reattach it here. And then you can also record media using your webcam, or you can just do an audio, or you can upload media. And the last option that I want to show you is something called Loom. Man, I love Loom. Loom is so great. So this is an example of a video that I filmed, a screen capture video that I filmed using Loom. Loom is an extension on Chrome. You can see it right up here. It's got the same little icon. I added this as an extension to Chrome, and I can take the student's work, for example, and if I want to, I can film using this little palette here. I can decide that I want to film something, and I can even set this up to do screen and camera, and my little webcam thing will show up here so that you guys can see me talking. And then I can annotate all over the screen, and I can point stuff out. I can show students workflows. So I love Loom. It's a really, really powerful tool. What happens is it generates a shareable link. And so you just copy the link, and then in your feedback area, you can just, oops, I put the link in the wrong spot. You can just paste that at the bottom. And in here, that link will not be active in SpeedGrader. But when a student receives a notification from Canvas that their assignment has been graded and the instructor has added comments, that link is active, so they can just click on it and it'll take them right to the feedback. And best of all, you get a notification that your student has viewed your feedback video. Yay. So really awesome. The only problem with Loom is that it's not captioned. So again, not accessible for students who are deaf or hard of hearing. Therefore, if you plan on using Loom, make sure that you let them know in advance and ask them if they would prefer an alternative. Andy, did you have a comment?
I had a question. Is Loom free?
It sure is. Yeah. So if you do a
awesome.
search for Loom for education, and there's also a link at the end of our presentation today, you can sign up for essentially what is a pro account, as long as you can verify your email address. So yes, it's a wonderful, wonderful tool. And there's also now a desktop app. So if you don't want to just be recording Chrome, you want to record PowerPoint or Word or some other application you're demonstrating, it works for that now too. So I love it. Can you tell?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think I covered everything in there as far as feedback goes, except for this part. And this is where we're finishing today, is the tone of our feedback. And man, let me tell you, I feel like I am still developing my warm, wise feedback skills, because, you know, as you're grading, I don't know if you've ever done this. Have you ever been grading and been like, oh my God, and then you go and you text your colleague and you're like, can you believe this, right? So this is where the warm, wise feedback comes in, is that you let that out and then you start writing your feedback. So how we deliver our feedback can really contribute to our students' success or lack thereof. So it's important that we make the feedback about the high standards, not about the quality of their work. So remind the students that, wow, this was a really rigorous assignment, and this feedback is based on how rigorous this assignment was. So this was tough, but you know what, like, here is some information to help you get to that point. You're using a growth mindset rather than a this is what's missing. Some kind of personal assurance that tells the students that they are capable. And again, more growth mindset stuff. And I gotta tell you, my entire education and my learning process has been very fixed mindset from the very beginning. And so adapting to this idea of a growth mindset has been a real challenge for me. I'm growing, hopefully. Okay, so, you know, give them feedback. Wow, you have come so far already in this class. Look at what you've done. Okay, so now we're gonna go there, and I know you can do this. And then provide student specific steps, concrete things that they can do to get to that endpoint, right? So next, let's work on blank. And so again, this is where the empathy and the flexibility comes in, right? We are showing that, you know, the student may have submitted this work and has been terrified about what the answers, what the feedback is going to be. And we're going to be sensitive to their fears and their insecurities about their work, and also show them that, man, you know what? This is a tough assignment, but here are the ways that we are going to get you to that point. So again, you know, this is engagement, right? It's regular and effective contact, but it's going above, and it's a step or two above that. So anyway, there are resources. This came from a rubric and a set of work, again, from Michelle Pacansky-Brock. And I've actually got additional resources here that that you might find useful. There is down here, there's a warm, wise feedback rubric, which is pretty cool. Do I have it up here? No, I don't, but I can pull it up really quickly. It's just a Google Doc. But it just basically shows, like, kind of, this is, you know, this is the fixed mindset. And this is kind of, you know, here's, you know, this is all right. You're doing okay with your feedback, but here's how you can make it even better for students, more encouraging for students, and still maintaining the rigor of the assignment, right? Because we still want to be rigorous. So this is really nice because it provides concrete examples of what those things were that I was just talking about. Also on this page is a link to Michelle Pacansky-Brock's How and Why to Humanize Your Online Course, and there's lots of resources on there. You may also want to check out her private website because she is a consultant now. And so there's a lot of great resources on there as well. I have links to Flipgrid and Padlet, which are, again, some of those social engagement tools that you can use. Flipgrid being video, Padlet being, my gosh, whatever you find on the web and you want to share. And then again, Pronto is something that you can use in your classes starting next semester. I really wish I was teaching a class next semester so I could use Pronto, but I'm hoping I can spy on all of you and you guys can show me how it's working. And lastly, the link to the CRC online course template in case you want to use any of the samples that I've shown you today. Okay, so here are my final thoughts. I'm not going to say it. You can read it if you want to. Do we have any questions? Or things you'd like to add that I left out? Because I'm sure I left some stuff out. Okay, well, I'm going to finish the workshop here. thank you all very much for attending. I'm going to stop the recording, but feel free to stick around and chat if you'd like to.